Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ask the CEO. Today, I'd like to introduce a very special guest. She is a venture partner at Machinelab Ventures. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Melissa Sassi. Welcome, Melissa.
Hi, it has been way too long since we've done this. I seem to remember sitting outside in San Jose, California, maybe 2019.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years.
More than a couple. Like, how the heck? We're in 2023 now. The time is sure going. Thank you for having me back.
It's an absolute pleasure. Melissa, you've come at the right time now because clean energy, climate change, sustainability, these are all really hot topics. And I know you're deeply immersed in all these technologies. You've visited 60 countries. You've even wrote
61.
61 now. You've even wrote your doctoral thesis on digital inclusion and the sustainable development goals.
Yep.
Can you share with us what are, we hear these words, the SDGs. What are the SDGs, also known as Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah. So, I think that when you think about making the world a better place, or, making sure that we have a planet that can be, left for future generations, if you will, and we are not in this, let's say, fiery pit of existential risk. We'll put that aside for now. We'll forget about the doom and gloom, and we'll think about what are all the things that we need to do to make the world a better place. And that means, how do we make sure that people have an opportunity to progress economically? They have an opportunity to get an education, to be on a level playing field with others, to have good health and well-being. Essentially, all of the different countries from around the world, and a variety of different individuals and thought leaders and everyday old people like me, you. I don't know if I can say, I think old. I meant not really old. No, we're not old. Absolutely not. No. But kind of thinking about what are those big things that we need to solve to make the world a better place. So there's 17 goals, and they kind of look at all aspects of society, whether it's life on land, life underwater, as I mentioned, health, inequalities, gender, so much more, partnership for the goals. And it is kind of like a set of metrics for us all to rally around, because you know how it goes. If you cannot define something, you cannot measure it. And you cannot also tell whether you're succeeding or failing. I think there's a lot of kind of controversy, if you will, around are we going to achieve them? Are we going to hit gender inclusion metric, blah blah blah? And there are a lot of finite details around these 17 goals. They definitely keep those of us, who are working on them up at night. But they're really goals and activities for all of us to achieve, as long as we understand how do we think about them in the kind of frame of reference of the individual, and not just the world or a president, a prime minister. Because I think for most of us that's pretty esoteric, and it's hard to make it meaningful for us in our day-to-day lives.
And I love the way you put that, where it's about the individual, and not the doom and gloom. Because if you think about it, right, like,
yeah,
why should the individual care about the world at large if he's suffering, right?
Exactly. If you're living on less than $1 a day,
Yeah.
and you don't have access to clean water, you don't have access to an education, you don't have access to the internet or other things that are related to political life, social life, or you're experiencing you're a child bride. How do you think about that? And I think it goes back to this kind of age old dilemma of, I'm not going to be able to go out and solve the world's problems unless I've got food to eat, unless I've got shelter. So I think it's this hierarchy of needs where, those of us who are able to, focus and do more, that's what we do. But, I think there are things, extremely micro things that each of us can do to contribute toward, achieving goals. So for example, we'll go back to the water example. Let's assume I've got clean water. Am I going to go and take this, plastic bottle and decide, you know what, I'm done with this plastic bottle. I'm just going to throw it outside in my backyard, or I'm going to throw it out the window as my car is speeding by because, you know what, I don't live in that neighborhood over there. That's somebody else's neighborhood. Who cares? So not to say that we all do stuff like this, but there are many different actions that we all can take to either share our skills forward or to contribute toward making the world a better place.
So, that's a great segue into tech. So, we're all into tech and we talk about tech all the time. So how does tech impact the SDGs?
I was thinking about this when I was doing my dissertation for my PhD. And as you mentioned, my focus area for my research is on the digital inclusion of underserved and underrepresented communities. And it's tied to solving the most pressing issues of our time, which essentially are the SDGs. And as I looked at each and every one of them, tech is all around us. We can't apply for e-government services without having digital skills. All right. We can't go out and do the same unless we have, access to an identity, maybe even a bank account, because maybe we've got to pay for something. There are so many different things that are intertwined with tech. Call it education, especially during all of the, COVID shenanigans where, young people, educators were forced to redefine what it meant to get an education and how to go about, doing that. Remote work, applying for a job, even a farmer in rural Kenya needs to understand their weather patterns and yields and pricing and all of these different things that technology is intertwined into every single aspect of everything that we do. And I need to spend more time, appreciating, kind of that turn it off time so that I don't get so caught up in technology, or we don't get so caught up in technology that we forget what everyday life used to be like, is like. But I think there's no escaping it. It doesn't matter whether it's work, play, family, social, political. Tech is all around us. And I think on top of that, we often, I think for those of us working in big tech, or those of us who are thought leaders, analysts, or just your everyday tech worker, sometimes we take for granted that we have access to the latest and greatest technologies, right? So we want a quicker phone. We want, a better camera on that phone. We want quicker connectivity, I don't know, I want to go to the moon, whatever it is. You can talk about this little achievement all the way, to the moon, if you will. Under half, not that far from half of the world doesn't have access to the internet. Significant swaths of people don't have digital skills, don't have safe drinking water, don't have access to an education. There are, and I don't remember the last numbers, this might be a little bit dated, but 250 million young people outside the school system. I think that number is higher. This is, again, a couple years old. These are young people outside of school, not learning to read, not learning to write. It could be that they're child brides, child workers, forced migration, war, whatever. Doesn't matter, even if you're that one person who needs to get from country A to country B to find a better life for yourself, tech is all around you. And it's not going to change. And unless you have the right skills to make meaningful use of tech, all of us, you are going to be left behind.
So, going back to the individual needs and, taking care of ourselves in order to take care of the bigger problem, there's a saying, money makes the world go round, right? So at the end of the day, we can have this great technology like electric vehicles and solar panels and wind turbines and all that. but all that costs money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are the business implications of supporting the sustainable development goals, for businesses and
Yeah.
wow.
I'd love to say that in every single thing that happens on Earth, there has to be a business model attached to it. But I think in reality, I'll give you an example. If you think about the way fixed wireless has been thought about in the past, think about getting people connected to the internet in a rural community. Assuming that fixed wireless is your solution, meaning you've got a tower and that tower has to be able to talk to the other tower and it has to be able to see, between point A and point B, you know, it's just not necessarily feasible for you to have, let's say, fiber. It forces you to say, are there other ways, such as, satellite technology? Why do I mention that? I mention that because unless you think about innovation, disruption, using technology and science and engineering and math and really smart people getting together from all parts of the world, you're going to keep trying the same things that you did yesterday. And potentially that business model is not going to be there. So if you look at, I'll give you a US example. There are large swaths of the United States and rural communities, especially on many of the tribal communities that lack access to the internet, sometimes lack access to water or electricity. Yes, this happens in the US as well. It's not just in the global South. It's been really hard historically for these rural telcos to go out and build networks based on the existing technology that they had been using. And they had to tap into things like the infrastructure bill to help augment what the private sector could do. Is that the right answer? Is that the wrong answer? I don't know. But what I do know is unless you've got, the right access to these things, you're not going to propel forward. So I think sometimes there has to be this balance of what is, good for the people that will then turn into growth later on. But as a company, that's sometimes hard. One of the things that I've really seen, kind of companies do lately is recognize that they've got to do well while doing good. And they can't just assume that there's this trade-off between making the world a better place and making money. Now, I'm not saying that the equation is going to work out perfectly every single time, but I think it's really important for those of us who are looking at social causes and not just automatically assuming it's a social cause, it makes the world a better place, makes us feel good, so there's no business model attached to it. I think a lot of times a charity, philanthropic arm of whatever will often look at, straight donation, straight philanthropy. But I think that's why we have that, age-old saying about teaching somebody to fish versus giving out a bunch of fish. There are often many different ways of attacking problems. And for me, I believe that you are going to be better off as a company if you think about that emotional aspect of being human to drive relevance while you're thinking about how am I going to turn this into making money? Because at the end of the day, money is important. It does make the world go round, but I don't know about you. I don't want to be a grumpy curmudgeon who's just, rich and, I've left the whole world, in a, I don't know, a blaze of flames behind me. But yeah.
So, I like you're saying doing well while doing good, because, ultimately there is that strategic vision where, maybe it's not going to make a lot of money now, but it's going to help the world at large. And that will eventually drive that economic gain.
Yeah. Like, for example, again, I'll go back to that, internet digital skills example where, there's study after study after study that talk about if you have access to the internet, if you learn digital skills, here is the impact that has on GDP growth, on economic outcomes at the individual level. Does it happen overnight? Maybe not, because there, obviously things that need to happen between point A and point B, but there is significant evidence out there that, well, one, tech is not going away. Two, right now, we even have, I think it's like 14 million or something like that, open engineering roles that cannot be filled. Yeah. And I hope I got the number right, which Forgive me if
If
I
it's
messed it
not
up,
14
but
million, it's 13 million or 15
it's
million.
huge.
Yeah.
But by 2030, if you think about when the UN Sustainable Development Goals are kind of like, I don't know, due, if you will, when we've got to achieve those things, they're projecting that there will be 85 million open engineering jobs. So tech's not going away, and we need to lean in so that we can continue to support ourselves and our families, because the way we've been doing things, it's got to include tech or we will be left behind.
So who is doing it right?
Oh gosh. You know what? I think that there are smidgens of companies and people, right? I'm an ex-Microsoftie, which I don't know, maybe I can still call myself a softie, even though, yeah, I'm definitely a softie. Yeah, you like that play on words? I did that on purpose. Yeah, so I love the work that they're doing when it comes to, social good and impact investment. Is all of it, I think as, touchy feel goody as it should be. No, I think there are a lot of improvement areas there, and with many other companies, but I love the work that Microsoft is doing. I see them on, kind of making a stance when it comes to, driving ethics in AI, when it comes to social justice and things where you look at it, you're like, okay, what does that have to do with a big tech company? Well, in many cases, a big tech company is driving us forward in a lot of ways, good and bad, right? But I love what Microsoft is doing. I love how BlackRock, for example, actually I worked at BlackRock too, but some of the things that they're doing when it comes to looking at women in the women on boards, women in the C-suite, and making sure that from a business perspective, we're thinking about climate action and for lack of better words, conscious capitalism. So we are, again, not just looking to make money, but we've got other elements that incorporate the SDGs, into everyday business. I think in terms of countries, that are doing it right, I don't think any country has quite figured out all of them. And I think that part is doom and gloom. I'm sorry to say, what kind of progress are we making? Doom and gloom. There are people still to this day, maybe even you, who don't necessarily look at these big goals and think, okay, here's my piece. Here's what I'm going to do today. Here's what I'm going to do tomorrow. And here's how that, helps us to achieve these things. Because I think some of us are like, wait, if I support this, am I supporting the evil empire of globalization? And obviously there are lots of conversations going on these days about, is there a bigger agenda? How about we just go make the world a better place?
That sounds like a great goal.
Right? It sounds so simple, but then I sit here, in my apartment in Mexico, thinking, okay, what have I done to make the world a better place today? And you know, if I go to sleep right now and I never wake up, am I going to be, proud of what someone reads about the work that I've done? Have I done everything that I could do, to be the change I wish to see in the world? And am I the change agent or the, person of impact that, not only did the right thing, but influenced others to do the right thing? Even though sometimes do the right thing is probably like, I don't know, to each his own, probably defined differently depending upon who you're talking to, right?
So talking about doing the right thing, which ones of the SDGs would be your favorite and why?
Oh gosh. So I am really, I kind of look at a few different ones. I love the reduced inequalities because, as a woman from the center of the US, in many respects, I was born into privilege. I don't have a choice. Well, maybe I don't know. Maybe I was swimming around somewhere in the universe. I was like, I want that to be my mom. I don't know, but either way, I I was born into what I was born into, and in some cases, that was a position of privilege. And I'm very very thankful for that. But in other respects, it's a position of disadvantage. And what I mean by that is less than 2% of venture capital funds goes to female founders. That's a bunch of rubbish because there are many, 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 women founders with amazing ideas who deserve access. A lot of systemic bias and change that needs to happen. So, that's one thing in my lifetime I would love to see change, and I'd love to be part of that movement. So reduced inequalities is one of them, which I think also comes hand in hand, with that conversation around women in the C-suite, women in on a boardroom, equal pay, that sort of thing. But it also goes hand in hand with the other SDG, which is about gender inclusion. I've spent a lot of time, as you mentioned, 61 countries. Um, and I've seen lots of different ways of doing things, lots of different norms. And sometimes they made me super uncomfortable. Sometimes I wanted to, lean in. In some cases, it made me think, or in some cases, it made me sick. Sometimes even in my own culture, rethinking the things that I thought I knew. But we need to have, I think places where women and girls feel welcome, where you're not a founder of color and feel like, a founder of or an engineer of color, and you walk into your job, you're like, wait a second, where are all my people at? I think there is too much bias in the world, conscious and unconscious. So those are a couple things. I think lastly, and this is kind of like having to pick your favorite, your favorite kid. Like, who's your favorite kid? You're like, that one. um, but that last one would be, quality education. We all, I
It goes
believe,
hand in hand, by the way.
yeah, yeah. We all deserve access to information, access to an education. And I believe we are living in a time that is so groundbreaking in terms of what have we seen and what's to be seen. It's like the microprocessor, right? Or the chip. And then it's like looking at, encryption and communication. These are things that have fundamentally changed access to information and our ability to be equal with the powers that be. So much, so much. So those are probably the three ones again: reduced inequalities, quality education, and gender inclusion. But again, it's like asking me, who's my favorite kid. So there you go.
Well, I would say that those are the enablers of all the other SDGs, because if you think about it, we as a society are doing a major disservice by having this bias. Because if someone comes up with this really great idea to solve a problem in the world, and it happens to be a woman, so are we going to say that we are not going to give the world
Right?
this great solution because a woman came up with that idea?
I
It's
think it's
so
even more
cool.
fundamental than that. I think in some cases it's just that idea, that solution is just not even sometimes making its way to the conversation to even say, I don't want to hear that idea, or I don't want to be part of that idea. It's just, it doesn't get through the noise sometimes because you've got, again, kind of systemic problems. But, you know, for those of us, women founders, it's exhausting trying to continue to, pitch for capital, if you will, and watching a failed founder who crashed and burned and left people in significant lurches, and all of a sudden land on $100 million to automate the toilet. Like I'm just giving you a bad example, but these things happen. And those of us tech founders or non-tech founders, whatever, we look at me like, wait a second, I just want a fair shot. Now, I'm not one of those like diehard crazy feminists who's like, poor sad me, I'm a woman and here's what that means. No, I know how to command, an audience. I know how to speak up. I know how to make sure that I'm included. But sometimes it just gets a little hard, where you're just like, oh man, do we really have to do this, today?
Very good perspective. And I think anybody that has daughters, should ask themselves, if my daughter were out there in the world, what kind of experience would I want her to have? It's,
Yeah, and how can we make sure that we're the right allies and role models? And I look at it from the perspective too of like, I may be, I may be a woman who faces blah blah and blah, but I don't know what it's like for a black founder from rural Mississippi, or rural Africa, some village, whatever, it doesn't matter. And so I think it's important for all of us to recognize that, we need to kind of listen and learn and figure out how do we be more inclusive? How do we, again, not only make the world a better place, but make money at the same time? Because I like shoes, I like to travel, I like to do things, and I like to solve big, wicked problems. So only way to do that is if you've got a sustainable business model that looks at, solving problems, giving people what they want, having some badass tech incorporated into it, ideally, and I don't know, rocking and rolling. Maybe I'm making it too simple, but there you go.
Well, it's got to be sustainable for the individual. If you're struggling to pay your bills, you're not being creative in solving world problems.
Oh, trust me, I understand. As someone who recently left her big job in tech and is figuring out, how do you survive off of blood, sweat, and tears of a social impact founder, or someone who's now running a venture studio and just at the beginning stage of that, it's hard. How do you think about making the world a better place if you haven't thought about where you're going to get your pasta today, or your meat, or your shelter? It doesn't matter.
So talking about where to find pasta, what keeps you up at night?
Ooh, what keeps me up at night? Right now it's making sure that I am looking at ventures that our studio is scouting, that are actually strategically positioned to last, that they have the right business model. Um, I'm like one of those rose-colored glasses kind of person. I look at, I try to look for the good in you and the good in all of us, and what you could bring to the table versus how are you going to ruin my life, and how do you make the world a worse place? And I think we all need to balance the good and the bad. I'm very thankful that I have a partner at Machinelab Ventures that helps me to kind of think about the more business aspects of things, of like, slap, slap. Not everybody is a rose, not everybody's a rose. Not everybody's awesome. Not everybody deserves to get an invite to to the dinner table. And I'm thankful I got a partner like that, because I think if I didn't, I probably wouldn't eat, because I'd be running around trying to make the world a better place. And then there'd be a shiny thing over there, and I'd end up everywhere and nowhere.
So what does the future hold?
Gosh. Well, I'd love to say that the future holds us achieving or solving or whatever these big wicked challenges in front of us, but I'm worried, and I think we all are. I think we need to find more sustainable business models for doing some of the things that need to be done. And I think that there needs to be systemic change across the board. The world is becoming more divided than ever before. Not only do we have brain drains and urban rural divides and class divides, we've got to figure out how do we come together as humans and solve some of the inequalities. There's no reason why somebody should be born into being an indentured servant, if you will, modern day slavery, while bloke over here, makes $1 billion a day, or I know that, whatever it is. Lots of different things to do, lots of different things to solve. We'll see how things like digital assets come to fruition. We'll see the impact of the world's monetary policies and provisions. We'll see how we achieve good health and well-being, quality education. What I do know is I want to be on the right side of history, and that is looking at how can I play my role, how can I influence others to play their role, and I want to be able to wake up and look at myself in the mirror and feel like I'm fired up to go be the change that I want to see in the world. And hopefully you'll join me.
Absolutely. So how can people connect with you, as well as to know more about Machinelab Ventures, and also how to get involved and make the world a better place?
Yeah, so I'll cover a couple things. So I'm on Twitter. You can find me at Mentor Africa with a K. I'm easy to find anywhere online. I think there's one other Dr. Melissa Sassi, and I don't remember if she's a doctor or not, but I might be the only Dr. Sassi in the world, which is kind of cool. Who doesn't want to be called Dr. Sassi, right? You can find me on Instagram. I'm not very good at Instagram. It's more personal and fun, but it's Sassi with two S's. Um, Fun thing, I don't know if I told you this, Abraham, but I'm updating my website, melissasassi.com, and it should kind of have some ways to engage. The new one's not live yet, so it looks like this dead, boring page, but Google me. I'm sure you can track me down. As long as you've got access to the internet and a device, you can find me. Feel free to send me a LinkedIn request. Feel free to ping me on Twitter or whatever. Again, I'm easy to find.
Awesome. Melissa, do you have any parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I would say, it's not too late to think about how do you go out and drive change, create change. How do you find ways to identify what your life's work is? That when you wake up in the morning, you know that this is exactly what I was meant to do. This is my life's work. It took me till I was probably, 40 before I got comfortable in my own skin, figured some of those things out. You want to get inspired and hear about some cool people doing some cool stuff, come on over to our Machinelab Ventures website, which you can find at MLVP, which is Machine Lab Venture Partners, MLVP. I know that sounds really long. MLVP.io. I hope you can find that, and I hope my ability to enunciate letters, made sense. It's always hard when you're trying to figure out the URL from someone, but hopefully you'll add that to the comments somewhere, Abraham, so that we're all on the same page.
Absolutely, will do. Melissa, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom. I really enjoyed having you on the show.
Thank you. I always love chatting with you. Take care.